At 6:30 in the morning, the owner of this house in a Polish village near the Belarusian border was downstairs watching TV news coverage of the Russian drone incursion. Soon, he was at the centre of the coverage, one of the drones crashing through the roof. No casualties here, or indeed anywhere in Poland, but a new level of threat.
I
heard a plane flying over and suddenly it seemed to descend faster and the roar grew louder. Something boomed, the light fell from the ceiling in the downstairs living room. I looked out the window and there were sheets of metal flying from the roof.
This infringement of NATO airspace lasted through the night, involving 19 Russian drones, Poland says, flying directly across the border from Belarus. Russia said none of them was intended for a target inside Poland. One theory that they were looking for a backdoor into western Ukraine. But Poland's Prime Minister clear this was a deliberate Russian provocation designed to probe NATO's response, and that while his country wasn't on the brink of war, this was the closest it had been since World War II.
This is not our war. This is not just a war for Ukrainians. This is a war, this is a confrontation that Russia has declared on the entire free world. And this must finally be understood by everyone, without exception.
And while Poland invoked NATO's Article 4, activating consultations between members, in Ukraine they were surveying the damage of another wave of Russian attacks. President Zelensky repeating his call for a Europe-wide air defence that would see NATO shooting down Russian drones and missiles in Ukraine's airspace, as well as its own. So far, no sign from NATO that it's ready to go that far, as its head condemned Vladimir Putin.
Stop the escalating war, which he is now basically mounting on innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure. Stop violating allied airspace and know that we stand ready, that we are vigilant and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
But how? A question in part for the E5 group of Europe's biggest defence spenders, Britain, France, Germany, Italy and Poland, meeting today in London. The talk here of solidarity, of strengthening NATO's eastern flank.
I've asked our UK armed forces to look at options to bolster NATO's air defence over Poland. Today, as E5 nations, we say to President Putin, your aggression only serves to strengthen the unity between our NATO nations.
But does it? Even here, acknowledgement that air defence systems are scarce, talk of not being provoked into hasty action. The broader European message directed at Donald Trump, time to up the pressure on Vladimir Putin to end the war. Ukraine and Poland saying Putin was now mocking his peace efforts. But if they were looking for clues as to his next move, scant help on his Truth Social site. What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones, he asked. Here we go. Wherever that may be, where we are already is unknown territory. For the first time since Moscow's full-scale invasion, NATO planes taking on, shooting down Russian armament in a NATO member's airspace. As the US under Trump pulls back from NATO, Europe has pledged to step up, not least through long-term spending increases. Now, a more immediate test of its capacity and resolve.
Well, I'm now joined from Kyiv by former Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis, from Paris by Fabrice Pothrier, a former NATO Director of Policy and former advisor to President Macron, and from Washington, D.C. by Jim Townsend, who was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defence for NATO Policy under President Obama. Gabrielius Landsbergis, let me start with you. How close do you think we are now to World War III?
Well, I think as close as we've ever been. Probably, but it still doesn't mean that that the distance that needs to be covered is small. That means that Putin is deliberately escalating. That means that he still controls the escalation. That means that he tells and shows how much he is willing to go, and we are just left in the position to respond. So yes, the situation is rather dire.
And you talk about response there. Article 4, NATO talks about consulting. Is that enough? Is that sufficient? Is it a robust enough response to have Putin fearful or not?
Well, no, I don't think that he's shaking in his boots after the concerns and strong-worded announcements. I think that what he would be worried about is that from now on, NATO would declare that any target that would enter NATO's airspace will be taken down. Doesn't matter if it's just one drone, if it's a stray drone, if it's swarm. Basically, we're changing our position towards this incident, from this incident. And secondly, that we will now start collaborating with Ukraine, helping them cover their skies, and not just that, but also implementing their lessons, how they are managing hundreds of drones every single night, and we will be using the same techniques in our countries.
Right. Well, of course, you're sitting in Kyiv right now, so, you know, that message particularly potent. Let me turn now to Fabrice Pothier. You know, Putin is not quaking in his boots at this NATO response today. Should it have been an Article 5 response, military retaliation, in your view?
I think the real question is, why did it take so long for NATO to respond to what is actually the 10 times over the past 3 years when you have Russian projectiles entering the NATO airspace. So I think it really shows a deep contradiction that we talk about solidarity with Ukraine, solidarity vis-à-vis the NATO allies, but actually, like the previous interviewee was saying, we're still in some statement and rhetoric, whilst Vladimir Putin is in the action.
Yeah, and your answer to that question, why did it take NATO so long? And, you know, the fact that 4 drones were taken down, but 15 got through. I mean, is NATO up to the job now?
Well, I think NATO, if it has to be, will be, because in the end, you also have an almighty member called the United States of America. I'm not saying they will necessarily intervene, but I think NATO vis-a-vis Russia is obviously a much bigger game than Ukraine. But the real question is, I think he's forcing us into our own contradictions, because basically now we are focusing on our own airspace and our own collective defense, whilst fundamentally the real question is whether we're willing to help Ukraine and to step in Ukraine airspace and maritime domain to actually try to push back on Vladimir Putin.
Right, and in alignment there with Gabrielius Landsbergis. So let me bring in the big member of NATO, Jim Townsend. I'll come back to Putin and how Putin seems to be calling the shots here, quite literally. But I want to get your response to Donald Trump's post on Truth Social. Here we go. What did he mean?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that question. I really don't know. Here we go. Maybe it's here we go. We're going to join with our NATO allies in Ukraine, and we're going to do more to assist Ukraine. We're going to take out those drones, or maybe we're going in another direction.
Yeah, well, could it be the long-promised sanctions? Because this has been long threatened now. It's surely high past time that those punitive sanctions that Donald Trump's been talking about for months now come out, isn't it?
Well, that certainly could be, and I hope it is, at least. But I really think that in addition to sanctions, we've got to do more than just release a statement out of the alliance. I would like to see us send some NATO aircraft, maybe a NATO squadron from an ally into Poland to help supplement their air defense there. I'd like to see that maybe reinforcing the Baltic air policing. They could be next. There's some things that we can do to deploy allied forces and strengthen the frontier. And that shows Putin that we're not going to just sit back and take it.
Gabrielius Landsbergis, have you got any hope of that happening? Or is, you know, Poland says that Putin is mocking Trump. Isn't that the reality?
Well, what is happening is that Putin sets a bar of what is normal now. This is what is the biggest problem, because, you know, a couple of years ago, you know, several incidents happened. We called them hybrid attempts, hybrid war, and they became normalized. Now, every next day, you know, you hear something exploding, you know, something happened, or, well, it's just another event. So we might expect the same thing with drones, right? So a couple of weeks ago, there was a single drone entered Lithuanian airspace, crashed in the military zone. Now it's, you know, more than 20 crashed in Poland. Maybe next week, you know, several in Romania. And then we adapt.
We're like frogs being boiled in the pan, aren't we?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, each time we're taking a step back, right? To rethink, replan, schedule some meetings, make some statements. But I'm absolutely in agreement that we have to push back, right? This cannot become normal. So drones need to be taken down, equipment need to be brought into, you know, to reassure Poland and others who are close to Russia, and tell Putin that, you know, we will never accept this as new normal.
Fabrice Pothier, this is a moment of truth for NATO, isn't it? If NATO doesn't do what has just been suggested, then Putin knows he can just push and push.
Well, I don't think it's a moment of truth, but it's indeed a test, both a test of the Polish air defense measures 2 days before a major military exercise with Russian and Belarus forces, Zapad 25. So I think it's a way to probe what's going on the Russia-NATO border. And it's, I think, a bigger picture here, which is important. You have to draw a contrast between what happened in Poland yesterday and what happens every night in Ukraine. I think in August, there was not a single night without Russian missiles and drones hitting cities in Ukraine. So I think we are reacting within NATO to what happened yesterday, but we need to see what's happening in Ukraine. And this matters a great deal, because if we let this happen more years, we will have war at our gate, and we'll have war entering progressively our own territory.
Right.
So I think this is a way to actually not get lost into what really matters here.
Jim Townsend, final thought. I mean, Putin is probing, and at the moment, is he finding mush rather than steel? And is that really Trump's fault, that his indulgence of Putin has brought us to the precipice of war?
I don't think his indulgence necessarily has brought us to that precipice. I think it certainly has added to it, but it's something that we have done for a number of years now, regardless of who was president of the United States, but we have not kept up our defense, and we haven't responded in the way we needed to respond against these various probes over the past couple of years. So I think what we're seeing in Poland is more a symptom of a continued tactic that works for Putin. He's ratcheting it up, every so often, seeing what he can get away with, because history has shown him that the response has been mainly mush, as you point out. It's been mainly mush in the past, and he's waiting to see if that ever changes to steel.
Jim Townsend, Fabrice Pothier and Gabrielius Landsbergis, thank you all very much for joining us.